The knock came at 7:32 p.m. on a Tuesday. 3 firm raps that echoed through my quiet house like thunder. I remember checking my watch, a habit from my days as a high school principal, before setting down the book I'd been reading. I wasn't expecting anyone. At 67, living alone in the same suburban Connecticut house for the past 30 years, unexpected visitors were rare. I shuffled to the door, my slippers whispering against the hardwood floors. Through the peephole, I saw a man, gray-haired, weathered face, maybe mid-60s. Something about his posture, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, struck me as familiar. When I opened the door, the porch light illuminated his face fully, and the world beneath my feet seemed to tilt. Those eyes, my father's eyes, staring back at me from a face I hadn't seen in 4 decades. "Hello, Margaret," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered but unmistakable. "It's been a long time." My brother David, the prodigal son who'd vanished from our lives without a trace, the empty chair at every family holiday, the name we eventually stopped saying out loud. 43 years, I replied, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "Not that I've been counting." He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "May I come in? I have something important to tell you." I should have slammed the door, should have demanded where he'd been all these years, should have screamed about our mother dying without knowing if her only son was alive or dead. Instead, I stepped aside. "I suppose you better had," I said. As he passed me, I caught the scent of aftershave and something medicinal. He walked with a slight limp I didn't remember. In my living room, he stood awkwardly, taking in the family photos on the mantel, photos he wasn't in. "You look like Mom," he said finally. "And you look like a ghost." I remained standing, arms crossed. "Why now, David? Why after all this time?" He sat heavily on my sofa, uninvited, and placed a manila envelope on the coffee table between us. "I'm dying, Maggie. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less." The bluntness of it stole my prepared anger. I sank into my reading chair. "That's not why I'm here, though," he continued. "I'm here because there's something you need to know, something I've kept hidden for 43 years, about Dad's death, about why I left." My throat went dry. "What are you talking about?" He leaned forward, those familiar eyes now intense with purpose. "Dad didn't die in an accident, Margaret. He was murdered, and I know who did it." The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, a car drove by, its headlights briefly illuminating the room through the curtains. And just like that, the carefully constructed story of my life began to unravel. I grew up in Millfield, Connecticut, a town small enough that everyone knew everyone. Elsa's business but large enough to have secrets. Our father, James Sullivan, was the town's most respected doctor. Our mother, Eleanor, taught piano and hosted the best Christmas parties in the county. David was the golden boy, quarterback, class president, pre-med at Yale. I was the quiet one, the good girl who stayed close to home, becoming a teacher and eventually principal at the same high school we'd both attended. Then came that rainy April night in 1980. Dad's car found wrapped around a tree on River Road. The official story: he'd swerved to avoid a deer, lost control on the wet pavement. Closed casket. David, home from college for the funeral, disappeared 3 days later. No note, no goodbye. His car abandoned at the bus station. Mom spent thousands on private investigators. I made missing person reports. We plastered his face on flyers across 3 states. Nothing. Eventually, we stopped looking. Mom died of a stroke in '98, still keeping his room exactly as he'd left it. I married Thomas, had 2 daughters, got divorced when the girls were in high school. Life went on. The pain dulled but never disappeared completely. Sometimes, I'd see someone on the street with David's walk, or hear a laugh that sounded like his, and for a split second, my heart would leap before reality crashed back. And now, here he was, sitting on my sofa, telling me our father was murdered. "I need a drink," I said, standing abruptly. In the kitchen, I poured 2 fingers of Thomas's old scotch into a tumbler with shaking hands. I didn't offer David one. When I returned, he was holding a framed photo of my daughters at their high school graduation. "Your girls?" he asked. "Emma and Sarah," I said curtly. "They're both married now. Emma has 3 children. So I'm a great uncle, he said softly, returning the frame to its place. You're nothing to them, I snapped. They don't even know you exist. I stopped telling stories about my long-lost brother when they were little. I took a burning sip of scotch. Now explain what you meant about Dad. David opened the manila envelope and removed several yellowed newspaper clippings, a small notebook, and what looked like old medical records. Dad wasn't the man we thought he was, Maggie, he began. The night he died, I was home from Yale. I overheard him arguing with someone on the phone in his study. He was angry, angrier than I'd ever heard him. He said, "If you tell anyone, I'll destroy you." Then he noticed me in the doorway and hung up. David ran a hand through his gray hair. He told me he was dealing with a difficult patient. I believed him, or wanted to, but later that night, after he left for what he said was an emergency at the hospital, I found this in his desk. He handed me the notebook. Inside were names, dates, and amounts, some circled, others crossed out. I didn't understand what I was looking at then, David continued, but I knew it wasn't patient records. When the police came, the next morning to tell us about the accident, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't an accident at all. I set down my glass. That's quite a leap, David. An argument and a mysterious notebook don't equal murder. No, but this might. He handed me one of the medical records. This is from Millfield General's archives. A patient named Elaine Winters, 22 years old, admitted with complications from a procedure. Dad was her doctor. I scanned the document, my stomach tightening at the clinical description of hemorrhaging, infection, and ultimately, death. She died from a botched abortion, Maggie. An illegal abortion that our father performed. And she wasn't the only one. The room seemed to tilt again. That's not possible. Dad was respected, ethical. He was also making money on the side, David interrupted, pointing to the notebook. Those are the women he helped. The circled names are the ones who paid extra for his silence. The crossed-out ones. He paused. Those are the ones who didn't make it. I stood up, pacing to the window. Outside, my quiet street was empty, normal. Inside, my world was shattering. Even if this is true, I said, turning back to him, it doesn't prove he was murdered. And it certainly doesn't explain why you disappeared for 43 years without a word to your family. David's face darkened. The night after the funeral, a man came to the house while Mom was sedated upstairs. He knew I'd been looking through Dad's things. He said if I didn't stop, I'd have an accident too. Said there were people in town, important people, who couldn't let Dad's side business come to light. Some of the women were connected to prominent families. Who was he? Detective Robert Caldwell, Mom's second cousin, the one who handled Dad's accident investigation. I remembered him, a burly man with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow who'd brought casseroles from his wife for weeks after Dad died. He gave me a choice, David continued. Leave town and never come back, or end up like Dad. I was 21, scared out of my mind. I took his car to the bus station, bought a ticket to Chicago, and left everything behind. I changed my name to David Miller, started over. I sank back into my chair. You could have called, written, something. Caldwell made it clear they'd be watching, and after a while, he looked down at his hands. After a while, it seemed too late. Too much time had passed. The shame of what I'd done, abandoning you and Mom, it was easier to stay away. Easier for you, I said bitterly. He nodded, accepting the rebuke. I deserve that. I deserve your anger. But Maggie, there's more to this story. And with the time I have left, I want to make it right. The grandfather clock chimed 8 times, marking the hour and seeming to underscore the gravity of the moment. I felt exhausted suddenly, as if I'd aged years in minutes. Make what right exactly? Dad's been dead for, 43 years. If what you're saying is true, his killer is probably dead too. David shook his head. Robert Caldwell is very much alive, retired to Florida. And he wasn't the killer, he was the cover-up. I believe the person who killed Dad was connected to Elaine Winters. And you want to what? Hunt down this person after all these years? For revenge? For truth, he said simply. And for closure, for both of us. I laughed without humor. You show up on my doorstep after 4 decades, drop this bomb about our father, and expect me to join you on some Some geriatric detective mission? I have a life, David. Daughters. Grandchildren. I'm not asking you to come with me, he said quietly. I'm asking for your help. Access to Mom's things. People in town still know you, trust you. Information I can't get on my own. And if I refuse? His eyes, those eyes so like our father's, held mine steadily. Then I'll respect your decision and leave. But I'm going to pursue this either way. I've spent too many years running from the past. I stared at him, this stranger who was my brother. Part of me wanted to throw him out, to protect the memory of the father I'd idolized. Another part, a part I'd thought long buried, wanted answers. I need time to think, I said finally. David nodded, gathering his documents back into the envelope. He wrote a phone number on a slip of paper and placed it on the coffee table. I'm staying at the Millfield Inn, room 212. He stood, wincing slightly at what I assumed was pain from his condition. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, Maggie, not a day went by that I didn't think about you and Mom. The life I could have had. After he left, I sat in the darkening living room for a long time, the untouched scotch warming to room temperature, the slip of paper with his number seeming to glow in the dim light. Finally, I picked up my cell phone and called the one person who might understand. Mom? Emma's voice was bright, the sounds of my grandchildren playing in the background. Everything okay? It's getting late. Everything's fine, sweetheart, I lied. Just wanted to hear your voice. Tell me about your day. As she chatted about kindergarten drop-offs and her husband's promotion, I found myself studying the family photos on my mantel. In every milestone captured, graduations, weddings, births, there was a David-shaped hole I'd stopped noticing years ago. What right did he have to reappear now, to disrupt the life I'd carefully built without him? But as I hung up with Emma, promising to visit that weekend, another thought surfaced. What if he was telling the truth? What if everything I believed about my father was wrong? I picked up the slip of paper with David's number, then set it down again. Tomorrow. I would decide tomorrow what to do about my long-lost brother and his impossible story. But that night, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, haunted by memories of my father. His gentle hands checking my temperature when I was sick, his booming laugh at the dinner table, his proud face at my college graduation. Could that man really have been performing illegal abortions? Could he have been responsible for deaths he covered up? And what about David, the brother who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd defended me against bullies, who'd helped me with calculus homework? Had fear really kept him away for 43 years, or was there more to his story? By morning, exhaustion had made my decision for me. I needed answers, even if they destroyed the foundations of my past. I called the number David had left. I'll help you, I said when he answered, my voice rough from a sleepless night. But we do this my way. No wild accusations, no disturbing my family, and if I decide at any point that this is hurting more than helping, we stop. Understood? Understood, he replied, relief evident in his voice. Thank you, Maggie. Don't thank me yet, I said. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for the truth. We agreed to meet at my house at noon. After hanging up, I went to the attic and pulled down the boxes of our mother's things I'd stored away after her death. I hadn't looked through them in years. It had been too painful. Now, I methodically sorted through old photo albums, letters, and documents, searching for anything that might confirm or refute David's claims. In a box labeled James Personal, I found our father's old datebooks, medical journals, and correspondence. Nothing seemed suspicious until I came across a small leather-bound ledger tucked between two medical textbooks. Inside were entries similar to those in the notebook David had shown me: names, dates, amounts. Some circled, some crossed out. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. The final entry was dated April 14th, 1980, the day before his death. When David arrived, I wordlessly handed him the ledger. He examined it, his face grim. This matches my notebook, he said. Same handwriting, same coding system. It still doesn't prove murder, I pointed out, but my voice lacked conviction. No, but it confirms he was doing something he wanted to hide. David sat at my kitchen table, spreading out his documents alongside the items I'd found. We need to look at his last patients, especially this one. He pointed to the final name in the ledger. CW, $2,000. How do we do that? Medical records are confidential, and it's been over 40 years. David smiled slightly. I might have spent the last 4 decades hiding, but I didn't waste them. I became an investigative journalist. I know how to find information people don't want found. I raised an eyebrow. An investigative journalist? That's quite a career change from pre-med. Life takes unexpected turns, he said with a shrug. My first editor said I had a natural talent for digging up secrets. I never told him why. We spent the afternoon creating a timeline of our father's final days based on his ledger, the newspaper accounts of his death, and our own memories. By evening, we had identified several leads to pursue: the mysterious CW, Detective Robert Caldwell, and the family of Elaine Winters. Caldwell is our best bet, David said. He's the one who threatened me, who covered up the truth about Dad's death. And he lives in Florida now? I asked. David nodded. Sarasota. I found his address online, but before we confront him, we need more evidence, something concrete that ties him to Dad's death. The police reports, I suggested. Caldwell handled the investigation. There might be something in the official records that doesn't match what we were told. Good thinking. Can you get access to those? I considered this. The current police chief, Mark Donovan, was one of my students. He might help us, unofficially. Perfect. David checked his watch. It's too late to do anything more tonight. We'll continue tomorrow. As he gathered his things to leave, I found myself studying him. The lines around his eyes, the slight stoop to his shoulders that hadn't been there in his youth. Cancer was eating away at him, yet here he was, pursuing a decades-old mystery. Why now, David? I asked suddenly. You've had 43 years to come back to tell this story. Why wait until you're dying? He paused, his hand on the doorknob. Because I was a coward, he said simply. Because I told myself I was protecting you and Mom by staying away. But the truth is, once I ran, I didn't know how to come back. He met my gaze directly. The cancer just forced me to face what I should have faced years ago. I don't want to die with this secret. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by the evidence of our father's double life, feeling as though I was mourning him all over again. The father I thought I knew was disappearing, replaced by a stranger who did unspeakable things. I called Emma again, just to hear her voice, to ground myself in the present. When she asked if I was okay, I nearly broke down. Just missing your grandmother, I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Getting nostalgic in my old age. That night, I dreamed of my father. In the dream, he was sitting in his study, writing in his ledger. When he looked up, his face was David's face, aged and sorrowful. You need to know the truth, he said. But when I reached for the ledger, it turned to ashes in my hands. I woke at dawn, determined to find answers. By 8, I was dressed and heading to the police station to meet with Chief Donovan. Mark had been a troubled teenager who'd turned his life around after I'd taken a special interest in him. Now in his 50s, he greeted me with genuine warmth. Mrs. Sullivan, what brings you here? Nothing wrong, I hope? Actually, Mark, I need a favor. It's about my father's accident, back in 1980. His smile faded. That's going back a ways. What kind of favor? I'd like to see the police reports. I'm trying to make peace with some family history. He hesitated. Those would be in deep storage if we still have them at all. Records that old might have been purged or damaged in the station flood of 97. But you could check. Mark studied me, concern evident in his eyes. This is important to you. Very. He nodded. For you, Mrs. Sullivan. I'll look. But it might take a day or two. Thank you, Mark. And one more thing. I'd appreciate your discretion. This is a personal matter. Of course, he paused. Is this about your brother coming back to town? I stiffened. How did you know about that? Small town, he said with a shrug. Millfield Inn doesn't get many out-of-town guests. Word gets around. I should have expected this. Millfield hadn't changed that much in 4 decades. Yes, I admitted. David's return has brought up some unresolved questions. Mark nodded thoughtfully. I'll call you as soon as I find anything. From the police station, I drove to meet David at the public library. We'd agreed to research the Winters family to find any connection to our father beyond the medical record David had obtained. The library's local history section was housed in a quiet corner of the second floor. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Patel, had been there since I was a child. "Margaret Sullivan," she exclaimed. "And who's this handsome gentleman?" I hesitated only briefly. "This is my brother, David." Her eyes widened. "David Sullivan? My goodness, it's been ages." "Yes, ma'am," David said with a charm I'd forgotten he possessed. "I've been away too long." "We're doing some family research," I explained, looking into local history from the late 1970s, early 80s. "Any specific focus?" she asked, leading us to the archives. "The Winters family," David said, "particularly Elaine Winters." Mrs. Patel's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, that was a sad business. Such a young girl." "You remember her?" I asked, surprised. "Of course. It was quite the scandal. Though people didn't talk openly about such things then." She lowered her voice. "She died from complications after an illegal procedure." Her father was beside himself with grief and anger. "Her father?" David pressed. "Charles Winters. He owned the lumber mill back then. He was never the same after Elaine died. Became a bitter man. Sold the mill and moved away a year or so later." She tilted her head. "Why the interest in such an old tragedy?" "Just filling in some family history," I said smoothly. "Thank you for your help." Mrs. Patel showed us to the microfilm readers where we could access old newspapers, then left us to our research. "Charles Winters," David murmured once she was out of earshot. "CW in Dad's ledger." "You think he killed Dad? For revenge?" "It fits. His daughter dies after an abortion performed by Dad. He pays Dad a visit, maybe confronts him, things get heated, and he causes the car accident." Frowned. "But why would Caldwell cover it up? What's his connection?" "That's what we need to find out." We spent hours scanning through old newspapers. We found Elaine's obituary from January 1980, which mentioned her father Charles and mother Vivian, as well as a brother, Peter. The cause of death was listed vaguely as following a brief illness. 3 months later came the news of my father's tragic accident, with Detective Caldwell quoted extensively about the dangerous curve on River Road and the heavy rainfall that night. "Look at this," David said suddenly, pointing to a small article dated just 2 weeks after Dad's death. "Charles Winters resigns from town council, citing personal reasons." "And here," I said, finding another piece from June 1980. "Winters lumber mill sold to Henderson Group. Charles Winters relocating to pursue other opportunities." David sat back, rubbing his eyes. "So Charles Winters loses his daughter in January, potentially to a botched abortion performed by Dad. Dad dies in April. Winters resigns from the town council and sells his business shortly after." "It's circumstantial," I pointed out, "but compelling." "We need to find Charles Winters," David said, "or his son Peter. Someone who can tell us what really happened." As we were preparing to leave, Mrs. Patel approached with a dusty yearbook. "I thought you might like to see this," she said, opening it to a bookmarked page. "Elaine's senior year." The photograph showed a pretty girl with long dark hair and a hesitant smile. The caption read, "Elaine Winters. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. Eleanor Roosevelt." "She was going to be a teacher," Mrs. Patel said softly. "Had a scholarship to Yukon." I stared at the young woman's face, imagining her scared and desperate, turning to my father for help. Had he seen her as a patient in need, or just a source of income? Had his actions led directly to her death? "Thank you," I said to Mrs. Patel, my voice thick. Outside the library, David and I sat in my car, processing what we'd learned. "We need to find the Winters family," he said. "Charles would be in his 90s now, if he's still alive. Peter would be around our age." "I know someone who might help," I said. "Thomas's sister Janet works at the county records office. She has access to property records, tax information, things that might help us track them down." "Your ex-husband's sister? Will she help you?" I smiled thinly. "Janet never liked Thomas much. She took my side in the divorce. We still have lunch every month." That evening, after calling Janet and arranging to meet her the next day, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset. The weight of the past 2 days pressed heavily on me. My father, the man I'd idolized, whose memory I'd cherished, might have been responsible for a young woman's death, and possibly others. The thought made me physically ill. My phone rang, startling me. It was Mark Donovan. "Mrs. Sullivan, I found those reports you wanted, and there's something strange." My heart quickened. "What is it?" "The official accident report is there, but the autopsy report is missing. And there's a notation that the case was reviewed and closed by the district attorney's office, which is unusual for a simple car accident." "Who was the DA then?" "William Henderson." The name struck me like a physical blow. Henderson? As in Henderson Group, the company that bought Winter's lumber mill? "I guess so." "Mrs. Sullivan, what's going on? Why are you looking into this now?" I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Mark, did you ever hear rumors about my father? About medical procedures he might have performed outside the hospital?" A long silence followed. "Mrs. Sullivan, those were just rumors. Ugly gossip." "But you did hear them." He sighed. "Yes, but that was a different time. Before Roe v. Wade was overturned. Things like that, they happened." "Did you hear anything about Elaine Winters specifically?" Another pause. "My mother mentioned once that the Winters girl had gotten herself in trouble, and that your father had tried to help her. When it went wrong, well, some people blamed him, including Charles Winters. I wouldn't know about that. I was just a kid then." "Can I see the reports you found?" "I made copies. I can bring them by tomorrow morning if that works." I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. William Henderson's name connected to both the lumber mill purchase and the unusual closure of my father's case seemed too coincidental. I called David immediately. "We need to look into William Henderson," I told him. "He was the DA who closed Dad's case, and his company bought Winter's lumber mill right after." "That can't be coincidence," David agreed. "Henderson could be the link between Caldwell and Winters. Maybe he facilitated the cover-up." "But why? What was in it for him? Power? Money? Or maybe he had his own secrets Dad was keeping?" The next morning, Mark delivered the accident reports as promised. David and I pored over them at my kitchen table. The official report detailed a single-car accident on a rainy night. The vehicle found wrapped around a tree at the bottom of an embankment. No skid marks, no witnesses. Death attributed to massive head trauma. "No autopsy report," David noted. "That's suspicious in itself." "And look at this," I said, pointing to the list of personal effects found in the car. "Dad's medical bag is listed, but not his wallet. Mom always said they never found his wallet." "Could have been thrown from the car," David suggested, "or taken by whoever caused the accident." We were interrupted by my doorbell. Janet had arrived with the information I'd requested. Janet Miller had been my friend long before she became my sister-in-law, and she remained loyal after Thomas and I divorced. At 62, she was still sharp as a tack and fiercely protective of me. "I don't know what you're mixed up in, Maggie," she said after greeting me with a hug, "but I brought what you asked for." Her eyes widened when she saw David. "Is that?" "My brother, yes," I said. "David, this is Janet." David extended his hand, which Janet ignored. 43 years without a word, and now you show up?" she said coldly. "Do you have any idea what your disappearance did to your mother, to Maggie?" "Janet," I intervened, "it's complicated. Please, we need your help." She gave David one more withering look before placing a folder on the table. "Property records for Charles and Vivian Winters. They sold their house here in 1981 and bought a place in Vermont. Last address I could find was in Burlington. Charles died in 2005. Vivian in 2010. "What about their son, Peter?" David asked. Janet raised an eyebrow at me. "Please, Janet," I said. "It's important." She sighed. "Peter Winters still lives in Vermont, owns a bookstore in Montpelier." She handed me a slip of paper with an address and phone number. "What's this about, Maggie? Why are you digging into the Winters family after all these years?" I exchanged a glance with David. "We're trying to understand what really happened to our father." Janet's expression softened. "Oh, Maggie, after all this time, why open old wounds?" "Because they never really healed," I said simply. After Janet left, Promising to keep our research confidential, David and I formulated a plan. We would drive to Vermont the next day to speak with Peter Winters. But first, we needed to learn more about William Henderson and his connection to Detective Caldwell. Henderson was a big name in town, I recalled. His son, William Jr., runs Henderson Development now. They've built half the new subdivisions in the county. Do you know him? Not well. He was a few years behind me in school, but his wife, Caroline, serves on the library board with me. A quick internet search revealed that William Henderson Sr. had died in 2012. His obituary listed numerous civic accomplishments, including 3 terms as district attorney and founding the Henderson Group, a family business dedicated to developing Millfield's future. So we can't ask him directly, David said, but maybe there's something in the public record about his relationship with Caldwell or the Winters family. We spent the afternoon at the county courthouse, searching through old public meeting minutes, property records, and newspaper archives. Our persistence paid off when we discovered that William Henderson Sr. and Robert Caldwell had served together on the Millfield Bank Board of Directors in the late 1970s. More significantly, we found records showing that Henderson had personally loaned Charles Winters a substantial sum in 1979, secured against the lumber mill property. So Winters was in financial trouble before Elaine died, David mused, and Henderson held the note on his, business. Which Henderson's company then acquired after Dad's death, I added. The timing is suspicious. As we left the courthouse, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. A man in sunglasses sat behind the wheel, seemingly watching us. When he saw me looking, he started the engine and drove away. Did you see that? I asked David. See what? I described the SUV and its driver. Could be nothing, David said, but he looked uneasy. Or someone could be watching us. We should be careful. That evening, as I packed an overnight bag for our trip to Vermont, I received a text from an unknown number. Stop digging into the past. Some secrets should stay buried. I showed it to David when he picked me up the next morning. Someone's nervous, he said grimly. We must be getting close to the truth. Or we're stirring up trouble for no reason, I countered, suddenly hesitant. Maybe Janet was right. Why open old wounds? David's expression hardened. Because the truth matters, Maggie. Dad wasn't perfect. The evidence we've found proves that. But he didn't deserve to die. And whoever killed him shouldn't get away with it, even after all these years. The drive to Montpelier took just under 4 hours. We spent most of it in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Occasionally, David would wince or shift uncomfortably in his seat, reminders of the cancer eating away at him. How bad is it? I finally asked as we crossed into Vermont. Bad enough, he replied, eyes on the road. Spreading to the liver. They offered chemo, but it would only buy a few more months at best. And you chose to spend those months chasing this instead of treatment? He glanced at me. I chose to spend them finding the truth, making amends. Is that so hard to understand? I looked out the window at the green mountains rising around us. No, I admitted, it's not. Peter Winters' bookstore, Winters' Tales, occupied a charming storefront on Montpelier's main street. Through the window, we could see a bearded man in his early 60s arranging books on a display table. He looked up as the bell above the door announced our arrival. Welcome to Winters' Tales, he said with a friendly smile. Can I help you find something? David stepped forward. Mr. Winters, my name is David Sullivan. This is my sister, Margaret. We'd like to talk to you about your sister, Elaine. The smile vanished from Peter's face. Sullivan, he repeated, recognition dawning. Dr. Sullivan's children. Yes, I said. We've recently learned some troubling things about our father's connection to your sister's death. We're trying to understand what really happened. Peter glanced around the empty store, then walked to the door and flipped the sign to closed. Follow me, he said, leading us to a small office in the back. I've wondered if this day would come. We sat in mismatched chairs while Peter leaned against his desk, arms crossed defensively. Your father killed my sister, he said bluntly, not intentionally perhaps, but through negligence. Elaine was 19, pregnant by a married man. She was desperate. Dr. Sullivan had a reputation for helping girls in trouble, for a price. We found evidence of that, David acknowledged. But what we don't understand is the connection to our father's death 3 months later. Peter's expression darkened. My father was destroyed by Elaine's death. He blamed himself for not being there for her, for not knowing she was in trouble until it was too late. But he blamed your father more. Did he kill our father? I asked directly. Peter looked startled. Kill him? No. My father was many things, but not a murderer. Then who did? David pressed. We have reason to believe Dad's car accident wasn't an accident at all. Peter was silent for a long moment. I don't know who caused the accident, he said finally. But I know my father confronted Dr. Sullivan at his office after Elaine's funeral. There was a physical altercation. My father threatened to expose what your father had been doing. And then what happened? I asked. William Henderson stepped in, Peter said. He'd been our family lawyer for years. He convinced my father that exposing Dr. Sullivan would only bring shame to Elaine's memory. Instead, he offered a deal. What kind of deal? David asked. Henderson would buy our lumber mill, which was struggling financially, at above market value. In return, my father would keep quiet about Dr. Sullivan and leave Millfield. Peter shook his head. I thought it was wrong, but my father was broken. He took the deal. When was this agreement made? I asked, a chill running through me. Early April 1980, Peter said. About a week before your father died. David and I exchanged glances. The timeline was significant. What about Detective Robert Caldwell? David asked. Was he involved in this arrangement? Peter frowned. Caldwell? The police detective? I don't recall him being part of the discussions with Henderson. He threatened me after Dad's funeral, David explained. Told me to leave town and never come back, or I'd have an accident too. Peter looked genuinely surprised. I didn't know that, but it makes sense. Henderson had connections throughout the town. If your father's death wasn't an accident, Caldwell could have helped cover it up. But who would have wanted Dad dead if not your father? I asked. I don't know, Peter admitted. But Henderson benefited the most from everything that happened. He acquired our mill at a time when development was beginning to boom. That property is now an upscale shopping center. As we prepared to leave, Peter retrieved an old photo album from his desk drawer. I want you to have this, he said, removing a faded photograph. It's Elaine. She was bright, funny, ambitious. She deserved better than what happened to her. I took the photo, studying the smiling young woman. Thank you for talking with us, I said. I know this can't be easy. It's been over 40 years, Peter replied. But some wounds never fully heal, do they? On the drive back to Connecticut, David and I pieced together what we'd learned. So Henderson makes a deal with Charles Winters, David summarized. Winters agrees to keep quiet about Dad's illegal activities in exchange for Henderson buying the mill. A week later, Dad dies in a suspicious car accident. Then Caldwell threatens me to ensure the whole thing stays buried. It points to Henderson as the one who wanted Dad dead, I said. But why? If Winters had already agreed to stay quiet, what threat did Dad still pose? Maybe Dad was threatening Henderson somehow, David suggested. Or maybe Henderson had his own connection to Dad's side business. We need to talk to Caldwell, I decided. He's the only one still alive who knows what really happened that night. Florida is a long drive, David said with a weak smile. Then we fly, I replied. Tomorrow. That night, back in my house, I called Emma to explain I'd be away for a few days on personal business. She sounded concerned, but didn't press for details. After hanging up, I sat on my back porch again, staring at the stars and thinking about my father. The man I'd remembered as kind and devoted had been performing illegal abortions for money. Some of his patients had died. Yet he'd also helped desperate young women when they had nowhere else to turn. The moral complexity was overwhelming. I was still sitting there when headlights swept across my yard. A car had pulled into my driveway. Moments later, someone pounded on my front door. Heart racing, I went inside and peered through the peephole. A man in his 70s stood on my porch, his face contorted with anger. I didn't recognize him. "Margaret Sullivan!" he shouted. "I know you're in there. We need to talk about what you and your brother are doing." I called David immediately. "Someone's at my door," I whispered. "An older man. He's angry about our investigation." "Don't open the door," David said urgently. "Call the police. I'm on my way." But before I could call, my phone pinged with a text from the same unknown number as before. "Answer the door. William Henderson Jr. wants to talk. The pounding continued. Mrs. Sullivan, this has gone far enough. My family's reputation is at stake. I made a decision. With my phone ready to dial 911, I opened the door a crack, chain still engaged. Mr. Henderson? I said. It's nearly midnight. And yet here I am, he replied, his voice tight with controlled fury. May I come in? This isn't a conversation for your neighbors to overhear. I'd prefer to talk tomorrow, in public. He laughed bitterly. After you and your brother have been dragging my father's name through the mud, questioning people all over town about ancient history? No, we talk now. I've called the police, I lied. They're on their way, Henderson's expression changed from anger to calculation. No, you haven't. But your brother's coming, isn't he? Good. I only want to have this conversation once. 20 minutes later, David arrived to find Henderson and me sitting stiffly in my living room, untouched cups of tea between us. William Henderson Jr., the man introduced himself, standing to shake David's hand with forced civility. I understand you've been investigating my father's business dealings from 40 years ago. Among other things, David said cautiously, taking a seat beside me. Henderson sighed, suddenly looking tired rather than angry. Look, I know what you think you've found. Some conspiracy involving my father, Robert Caldwell, and your father's death. But you're missing crucial context. Then provide it, I challenged. Henderson studied us for a moment, then nodded. My father wasn't perfect. He was ambitious, sometimes ruthless in business. But he wasn't a killer. Then why did Robert Caldwell threaten me? David demanded. Why was there no autopsy report for our father? Because my father was protecting people, including your mother, Henderson replied. Protecting her from what? I asked. Henderson leaned forward. Your father was performing illegal abortions. That much you've discovered. What you don't know is that my father was one of his patients' husbands. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. My first wife, Rebecca, Henderson continued, his voice lower. She was unstable. When she got pregnant in 1979, she wasn't fit to be a mother. She went to Dr. Sullivan without my knowledge. There were complications. She nearly died. And you blamed our father, David said. Initially, yes, I was furious. But then I realized the position he was in. Rebecca had lied to him about having my consent. And the truth is, she probably shouldn't have had a child in her condition. Henderson rubbed his face wearily. When Elaine Winters died a few months later, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came to light. So you made a deal with Charles Winters, I said. Henderson nodded. To protect everyone involved, including your family. A scandal would have destroyed your mother, your family's reputation. But then our father died, David said, conveniently eliminating the biggest threat to your secret. Henderson's eyes flashed. I had nothing to do with Dr. Sullivan's death. Yes, the timing was suspicious, but it genuinely was an accident. Then why was there no autopsy? I pressed. Why did Caldwell threaten David? The autopsy report was misplaced because it showed your father had been drinking heavily that night, Henderson said. Caldwell thought he was protecting your family's reputation. And he threatened David because he was afraid a 19-year-old with a grudge would start making wild accusations that would hurt everyone involved, including Eleanor Sullivan. You expect us to believe that? David scoffed. I expect you to consider it, Henderson replied, and to consider the consequences of pursuing this further. You're not just digging up my father's sins, but your own father's as well. Is that really the legacy you want to leave? More pain? More scandal? We want the truth, I said firmly. Henderson stood. The truth is rarely pure and never simple, Mrs. Sullivan. My father made mistakes. Your father made mistakes. But dredging up the past won't undo them. He placed a business card on the coffee table. If you insist on continuing this crusade, at least give me the courtesy of knowing what you plan to do with whatever you find. After he left, David and I sat in stunned silence. Do you believe him? I finally asked. Not entirely, David replied. There's still something he's not telling us. But his story about Dad drinking that night, it fits with what I remember. Dad was upset after that phone call I overheard. He might have been drinking before he drove. We still need to talk to Caldwell, I insisted. He's the only one who saw Dad's car that night, who handled the investigation. Agreed. But Henderson's warning complicates things. If we push too hard, we might expose things that hurt more people than just Henderson. Like who? David hesitated. Like Mom's memory. If people learn what Dad was doing, how it led to his death, her reputation suffers too. I hadn't considered that. Our mother had been beloved in Millfield, a pillar of the church, a talented music teacher, a generous neighbor. Would revealing the truth about our father tarnish how people remembered her? We've come too far to stop now, I said finally. We fly to Florida tomorrow as planned. But that night, doubt crept in. Was I pursuing this for justice, or for some selfish need to rewrite my family's history? What good would come from exposing 40-year-old secrets? And yet, the thought of abandoning our search now felt like a betrayal. Of David who was dying, and of some deeper principle I couldn't quite articulate. The next morning, as we boarded our flight to Sarasota, I was still wrestling with these questions. David, however, seemed more determined than ever. Henderson's visit proves we're close to the truth, he said, as we settled into our seats. He wouldn't have come if he wasn't worried about what we might find. Robert Caldwell lived in a modest retirement community near Sarasota. We rented a car at the airport and arrived at his address by mid-afternoon. The Florida heat was oppressive after Connecticut's mild spring weather. A woman in her 70s answered the door. Yes? Mrs. Caldwell? I asked. I'm Margaret Sullivan, and this is my brother David. We're looking for Robert Caldwell. Her expression turned wary. Sullivan? From Millfield? Yes, David confirmed. We need to speak with your husband about our father, Dr. James Sullivan. She hesitated, then opened the door wider. Bob's on the lanai. He's not well. Alzheimer's. Some days are better than others. We followed her through the house to a screened porch overlooking a small man-made lake. An elderly man sat in a recliner staring at the water. Bobby, Mrs. Caldwell said gently, you have visitors from Millfield. Do you remember the Sullivans? Caldwell turned slowly. His face was gaunt, his eyes cloudy with confusion. But as he looked at David, a spark of recognition flared. The Sullivan boy, he said, his voice stronger than I expected. You weren't supposed to come back. Hello, Detective Caldwell, David said, sitting in a chair opposite him. I need to ask you about my father's death. Mrs. Caldwell looked alarmed. I don't think this is a good idea. His doctor says not to upset him with— It's all right, Marilyn, Caldwell interrupted, his gaze fixed on David. I've been waiting for this conversation for a long time. She left reluctantly, casting worried glances back at us. Your father's car, Caldwell said without preamble. It didn't just run off the road, the brake lines had been cut. The blunt admission stunned us both. You knew? David asked, leaning forward. You knew it was murder? Caldwell nodded slowly. Knew the moment I saw it. Clean cut, professional job. Who did it? I demanded. Caldwell's gaze shifted to me, then back to David. Henderson arranged it, hired someone from out of town. Professional job, he repeated. William Henderson Sr., David clarified. Why? Blackmail, Caldwell said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Your father was blackmailing him. Over Rebecca Henderson's abortion? I asked. Caldwell looked confused. Who? Henderson's first wife, David explained. She was one of Dad's patients. No, Caldwell shook his head. The girl, the one who died. Elaine Winters? I prompted. Henderson was the father, Caldwell said, of her baby. He was having an affair with her. Your father found out, threatened to expose him if Henderson didn't pay. David and I exchanged shocked glances. This was a twist we hadn't anticipated. How do you know this? David asked. Henderson told me. After. Needed help covering it up. Caldwell's expression turned pleading. I had no choice. He was powerful. District attorney, bank director. He owned half the town. So you helped him cover up my father's murder, David said, anger edging his voice, and then threatened me to keep me quiet. Caldwell nodded miserably. For your own good, boy. Henderson would have killed you too. He was ruthless when cornered. And what about the autopsy report? I asked. The one that supposedly showed Dad had been drinking? Fabricated, Caldwell admitted. Your father was sober that night. The brake lines were cut while his car was parked at the hospital. He never had a chance. A wave of nausea swept over me. All these years, We'd believed our father died because he swerved to avoid a deer. In reality, he'd been murdered in cold blood, unable to stop his car as it careened off that dark, wet road. "Why are you telling us this now?" David asked. Caldwell's eyes cleared momentarily, showing a lucidity that had been absent before. "Because I'm dying. Because I've carried this secret for too long. Because you deserve to know the truth about your father." "He was performing illegal abortions," I said. "Women died because of him." "He was helping women who had nowhere else to turn," Caldwell countered. "Yes, he took money. Yes, sometimes things went wrong. But he wasn't a monster. Henderson was the monster." As we prepared to leave, Caldwell grabbed David's wrist with surprising strength. "Henderson's son knows," he said urgently. "Everything. He protected his father then. He'll protect his memory now. Be careful." Mrs. Caldwell showed us out, her expression a mixture of concern and resignation. "Whatever Bob told you, he has good days and bad days. His memories get confused." "He seemed very clear about certain things," I said. She sighed. "That's how it is with Alzheimer's. Some memories stay sharp while others fade. Just, whatever you do with what he told you, remember he's a sick old man who can't defend himself anymore." On the flight back to Connecticut, David and I processed Caldwell's revelations. "If Henderson was Elaine's lover and the father of her child, everything changes," David said. "It wasn't just about protecting his reputation over Rebecca's abortion. It was about covering up statutory rape, at minimum." "Elaine was 19, I pointed out. "But when did the relationship start? She was Henderson's daughter's friend. She babysat for the Henderson family. What if it started when she was underage?" I hadn't considered that possibility. "So Dad discovered this and tried to blackmail Henderson." "It fits his character, unfortunately," David said grimly. "The ledger, the coded payments. Dad was using his knowledge to make money. And it got him killed," I finished. "The question now is what we do with this information," David said. "William Henderson Sr. is dead, he can't be prosecuted, and his son knows everything, according to Caldwell," I interrupted, "and threatened us, in his way, when he came to my house." "So we have a choice," David said. "Pursue justice for Dad by exposing Henderson Jr.'s complicity in covering up his father's crime, or let sleeping dogs lie," I finished. "Protect Mom's memory, avoid more pain." David was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't come back just for justice, Maggie," he finally said. "I came back for forgiveness. From you. From Mom's memory. I abandoned you both because I was scared and selfish." "You were 21 and threatened by a corrupt cop," I reminded him. "I could have found a way to contact you, to explain, but I didn't." He looked out the airplane window at the clouds below. "I built a new life, pretending the old one never existed. I told myself it was for your protection, but really, it was easier than facing what I'd done." I reached over and took his hand, the first time I'd voluntarily touched him since his return. "I forgive you, David. I think Mom would too." His eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. When we landed in Connecticut, we had a decision to make: confront William Henderson Jr. with what we'd learned, or walk away with the truth but no justice. "Let me sleep on it," I said as David dropped me at my house. "This isn't a decision to make while we're exhausted." But sleep eluded me again that night. I kept seeing my father's car plunging off that dark road, imagining his terror as the brakes failed. I thought about my mother, spending decades believing his death was a tragic accident. I thought about David, carrying his guilt and fear for 43 years. And I thought about William Henderson Jr., living in his mansion built on his father's blood money, threatening us to protect a legacy of corruption and murder. By morning, my decision was made. I called David. "We need to confront Henderson," I said without preamble. "Not for revenge, but for truth. Dad wasn't perfect, far from it. But he didn't deserve to be murdered. And Henderson doesn't deserve to threaten us into silence." "I agree," David said. "But we need leverage. Proof." "Caldwell's testimony?" "The word of an old man with Alzheimer's against one of the most powerful men in the county? Not enough." "Then what?" David was quiet for a moment. "The brake lines," he said finally. If Dad's car was tampered with, there would have been an investigation report, separate from the autopsy and accident report. Which might not have been misplaced like the autopsy, I realized. Mark Donovan might have access to it. It's worth a try. Mark was reluctant when I called, but eventually agreed to search the archives again. 3 hours later, he called back. I found something, he said, his voice tense. A supplementary investigation report, filed a week after your father's accident. The investigating officer noted suspicious damage to the brake lines, but concluded it was likely caused by the impact. Who was the investigating officer? I asked. Not Caldwell, someone named Jenkins. Is he still around? Retired to Arizona 15 years ago, Mark said. Mrs. Sullivan, what's going on? This report, it raises questions about your father's accident. That's what we're trying to determine, Mark. Can I get a copy of that report? I've already made one, but I need to know what you're planning to do with it. I hesitated. The right thing, I said finally. That's all I can promise right now. Armed with the report, David and I arranged to meet William Henderson Jr. at his office. His secretary seemed surprised when we requested an appointment, but scheduled us for that afternoon. Henderson's office occupied the top floor of a sleek building bearing his company's name. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Millfield, a town his family had helped build and corrupt in equal measure. Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. Miller, he greeted us, using David's assumed name pointedly. I trust you've reconsidered your investigation? Actually, we've completed it, David said, placing the supplementary investigation report on Henderson's desk. We know your father had our father killed, we know why, and we know you've been covering it up all these years. Henderson's expression didn't change as he glanced at the report. This proves nothing. By itself, no, I agreed. But combined with Robert Caldwell's testimony about your father hiring someone to cut the brake lines, it's compelling. Caldwell is senile, Henderson scoffed. His testimony wouldn't hold up anywhere. Perhaps not in court, David conceded. But in the court of public opinion? When people learn that William Henderson Sr. had an affair with 19-year-old Elaine Winters, got her pregnant, then had her abortion provider killed when he threatened to expose the truth, that would certainly tarnish the Henderson legacy. A muscle twitched in Henderson's jaw. What do you want? Justice, I said simply. Acknowledgement of what your father did. Henderson laughed bitterly. And how exactly do you propose I deliver that? My father is dead, so is yours. No court would touch this case after 43 years. We don't want a trial, David said. We want the truth made public, a statement from you acknowledging what happened. You're insane, Henderson snapped. I would never. Then we'll do it for you, I interrupted. We have enough to take to the press. The Hartford Courant, the New York Times, Millfield developers' empire built on murder. Imagine the headlines. Henderson's face flushed with anger. You're bluffing. You wouldn't expose your own father's illegal activities. We've made peace with who our father was, David said quietly. Have you? Henderson stared at us for a long moment, then sighed. What exactly would this statement entail? The truth, I said. That your father had our father killed to prevent him from exposing their connection to Elaine Winters' death. That you've known this all along, and an apology to our family. And if I do this, you'll drop the matter? No press, no further investigation? David and I exchanged glances. Yes, David said. But the statement needs to be public. A press conference. No hiding behind closed doors. Henderson considered this, fingers drumming on his desk. I'll need time to consult with my attorneys, to understand my legal exposure. 48 hours, I said firmly. Then we go to the press with what we have. As we left Henderson's office, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. We were close to the truth being acknowledged, but at what cost? The father I thought I knew was gone forever, replaced by a complex, flawed man who'd made terrible choices. Are you okay? David asked as we walked to the car. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wishes we'd never started this, that I could go back to believing Dad was the person I thought he was. The truth doesn't erase the good in him, David said gently. It just makes him human, complicated, like all of us. 2 days later, William Henderson Jr. held a press conference outside the Henderson Group headquarters. With David and me standing silently nearby, He read a prepared statement, acknowledging that his father had been responsible for the death of Dr. James Sullivan in 1980, following a dispute over medical services provided to a young woman with whom my father had an inappropriate relationship. He apologized to the Sullivan family for the pain caused by this tragic event and the subsequent cover-up. He announced his resignation as CEO of Henderson Group and the establishment of a scholarship fund in Elaine Winter's name for young women pursuing careers in healthcare. The press conference made national news. For days, Millfield buzzed with the revelation that one of its most prominent citizens had been a murderer. Old rumors about my father resurfaced, now confirmed. Some people offered condolences, others avoided me entirely. Emma and Sarah were shocked when I finally told them the full story. They had questions I couldn't fully answer, judgments I couldn't dispute. But ultimately, they stood by me, recognizing that the sins of their grandfather didn't define them, or me. A week after the press conference, David and I visited our parents' graves. Side by side, we placed flowers and stood in silence, processing the complicated legacy we'd inherited. "I wish I could have said goodbye to Mom," David said, his voice breaking. "Explained why I left." "She knew you loved her," I assured him. "She never stopped believing you'd come back someday." "And Dad?" David asked. "What do we believe about him now?" I considered this, looking at the simple headstone that bore our father's name, birth date, and the date of his murder. That he was neither hero nor villain, that he helped women when the law wouldn't, even if his motives weren't always pure, that he loved us in his way. "And that he didn't deserve to die like that," David added, "no matter what he did." "No," I agreed. "He didn't." As summer turned to fall, David's condition deteriorated rapidly. He moved into my guest room when he became too weak to stay alone at the hotel. I became his caregiver, administering pain medication, helping him to the bathroom, reading to him when his vision began to fail. One evening in late September, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he turned to me with unexpected clarity in his eyes. "Thank you, Maggie," he said, "for forgiving me, for helping me find the truth, for letting me come home to die." "Don't talk like that," I protested, though we both knew the end was near. He smiled weakly. "It's okay. I'm ready. I've made my peace." He reached for my hand. "I just want you to know that leaving was the biggest mistake of my life, and coming back was the best decision I ever made." David died 3 days later, peacefully, in his sleep. I held his hand as his breathing slowed and finally stopped. In those final moments, he wasn't the 64-year-old stranger who'd appeared on my doorstep months earlier, but my big brother, the one who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd defended me against bullies, who'd helped me with my calculus homework. The funeral was small, just me, my daughters, and their families. We buried him beside our parents, the family finally reunited in death as we hadn't been in life. In his will, David left me his journals, dozens of volumes chronicling his life during the years we'd been apart. His career as a journalist, his travels around the world, his 2 brief marriages, his childless existence, and on every page, references to the family he'd left behind, the sister he missed, the mother he'd abandoned. His regret was palpable in every entry. He also left a letter for Emma and Sarah, explaining who he was, why he'd stayed away, and how proud he was of the women they'd become, even though he'd never had the chance to know them. "Your mother," he wrote, "is the strongest, most forgiving person I've ever known. That strength runs in your blood, too." A year has passed since David knocked on my door that Tuesday evening. Millfield has largely moved on from the scandal, though people still give me curious glances sometimes. William Henderson Jr. sold his company and moved away. The Elaine Winters Scholarship has already helped 3 young women begin medical school. I retired from the library board and now volunteer at a women's health clinic in Hartford. Sometimes, when I'm helping a frightened young woman navigate her options, I think about Elaine Winters and the impossible choice she faced. I think about my father, his compassion and his flaws. I think about the complex moral landscape we all inhabit, where right and wrong aren't always clearly defined. And I think about David, my brother who ran away, who built a life apart from us, but who found his way home in the end. Who helped me understand that truth, however painful, is ultimately less destructive than secrets kept too long. Last week, Emma's oldest daughter, Julie, found an old photo of David in his Yale days. "He looks like Grandpa," she observed. "Was he a good man?" I considered the question carefully. "He was human," I said finally. "Like all of us. He made mistakes, but in the end, he tried to make things right. And yes, I believe he was a good man." As I approach 70, I find myself thinking more about legacy, what we leave behind, what we carry forward. The truth about my father and brother didn't destroy their memory, it completed it. They were flawed, complex men who made difficult choices in difficult times. Understanding that has helped me see myself more clearly, too, my own capacity for both judgment and forgiveness, for holding on and letting go. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I imagine David is sitting with me on the porch, watching the sunset as we did in his final days. "We did the right thing," I tell him, bringing the truth to light. And in the gentle evening breeze, I almost hear his reply. "The truth will set you free, Maggie. It always does."